Hello and welcome to Creating Disciples with me, Austin Roberts. Today we are going to be looking at the first chapter of Ruth, and we are so excited to have you join us. As I have made my journey through life so far, I think that there is one thing that most people would agree with me on, and that is simply that as we do live our lives, we just want to be loved. And when I say that, I mean pure, unconditional, unadulterated love. That is truly what we yearn for, whether it is from a spouse, a sibling, parents, children. Whatever we do in life, that is probably one of the number one things that we strive for and yearn for, to be loved. In fact, I would like to read you a quote from C.S. Lewis. He says this, "To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to be sure of keeping your heart intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully around with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safely in the casket of your selfishness. And in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will not change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, and irredeemable. The only place outside of heaven where you can be perfectly safe from the dangers of love is hell." And I think Lewis is right here. The truth is we all want to be loved. And sometimes we kind of shut ourselves in a little casket to protect ourselves. But it's still what we want. We want to be loved. I came across an article in Christianity Today written by M. Craig Barnes, who is an author, a scholar, and the president of Princeton Theological Seminary. And he tells about an interesting premarital counseling session. And he writes this, "We were only a few weeks away from the wedding, and we had already put the finishing touches on the service. As we came to the end of this last meeting, the groom-to-be blurted out, 'I just have to say that I am so scared of this.' He suddenly had the undivided attention of his fiancée. He quickly added, 'Oh no, honey, it isn't that I'm afraid of being married to you. I'm afraid of losing you. When my mother died, the grief was just overwhelming, and I love you even more. I just don't know how I can ever survive if something happens to you.' Then he looked at me." Barnes says, "I could tell from his pleading eyes that he wanted me to reassure him that they were both young and healthy and that he needn't worry about such things. But I couldn't say that because I have buried too many young people. So I said, in my experience, 100% of all marriages come to an end. Some tragically through divorce or early death. Others last for over 60 years. If your marriage is long and filled with intimacy, then when death comes, you're going to be even more in love than you are now. Then it will hurt even more to say goodbye when the time finally comes. And that's the best scenario you've got. So why do you want to go through marriage wondering if this is the day you'll lose your beloved? Give her up today. Get the grieving over with. Die to your right to have her, die to your fear of losing her, and die to the myth that you can keep her. Until you do, you will be too afraid to enjoy her." And that's the truth. We all just want to be loved, and sometimes love hurts. But we all yearn for that unconditional, unadulterated, pure love. So today we're going to look at a story in the Bible that talks about that type of unconditional love. In fact, we are going to read out of the first chapter of Ruth. And I would like to invite you, if you have a Bible, to open there with me. We're going to read this, and we're going to see a bit about unconditional love and what that can do to a person and how it is shown. So we're going to read Ruth chapter 1, and we're just going to read the first 5 verses to begin with, just to kind of set the backdrop, set the stage for what is going on in this portion of the Bible. So let's read together. The author writes, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah, the other Ruth. And they had lived there about 10 years. Both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So that's kind of the backdrop of the narrative into which we step today. So we've got Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and they have 2 sons. Then we've got this famine in Israel, and things are tight. So Elimelech decides, okay, we cannot survive like this, so he packs the family up, and to Moab they go. And then while they are there, Elimelech himself passes away. Then the 2 sons marry 2 Moabite women. And then after a while, the text says about 10 years, both of them also pass away. And so we stepped into kind of this interesting story, interesting time period. And what Naomi does next is also interesting. So we're going to return to the text now that we have some of the background and context with us, and we're going to read what she does next. So let's read together, this time beginning with Ruth 1, verse 6. The author writes, "When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, 'Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband.' Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, 'We will go back with you to your people.' But Naomi said, 'Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband, even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight, and then gave birth to sons. Would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me.' At this they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. 'Look,' said Naomi, 'your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her.' But Ruth replied, 'Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me.' When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the 2 women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, 'Can this be Naomi?' 'Don't call me Naomi,' she told them. 'Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me.' So Naomi returned to Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning." So we have this narrative in this chapter. And as you know, we ended the first section of the text with Elimelech and Naomi's 2 sons dying. So we have these 3 women, Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth. Now understand that during this time period in history, this was a man's world. For 3 women to be living alone would have been very difficult, and they would have had a lot of trouble providing for themselves, particularly Naomi, because they are in a land that is unfamiliar to her, where she is not from, where she probably doesn't know tons of people, and they live in a different culture now. So that's where they are. And then Naomi gets word that the famine in Israel is over. So she thinks, I have nothing here in Moab. I'm going to pack up and return to Israel. And her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, decide to go with her. And so that's what happened. They start the journey headed toward Bethlehem. And we read that on this journey, they have this conversation. There's this dialogue between them. and they start to talk to one another. And Naomi looks at her two daughters-in-law and thinks, man, I have had a difficult time in Moab. How can I ask them to go through the same thing when they come to Israel? They're not from Israel. They don't know anybody there. The culture is different. I can't ask them to do that. So she turns to her daughters-in-law and says, listen, you cannot come with me. Israel is a foreign land to you. Return home to Moab, to your parents, where you can find other husbands and live a good life. Going to Israel is going to be difficult for you. You should go home. And at that, both of the daughters-in-law protest. They say, no, you are our mother. We're going to come with you. And again, Naomi says, listen, you can't come with me. Even if I had sons today, would you wait for them to grow up to marry them? You can't do that. That would never happen anyway. You must return home. And at this, Orpah finally relents and says, okay. The text says she weeps aloud, she kisses her mother-in-law goodbye, and returns to Moab. But Ruth is a different story. Ruth is an interesting character in this narrative because she doesn't do what Orpah does. She does something entirely different. In fact, there is a central verse to this narrative that we are going to read together. So let's read it one more time. It's Ruth 1, verses 16 and 17. We're going to see what she said here. The text says, but Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. You know, if I had to summarize that statement Ruth makes here in the first chapter of this book, I think I would summarize that statement by saying that is true, pure, unadulterated, unconditional love. And that's what Ruth shows Naomi here in this text. She shows her love. And it's something, perhaps, that Naomi has not experienced in a while, but she gets it here from Ruth. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this interesting relationship between Ruth and Naomi, because the truth is, Ruth is really the least likely person in the narrative to be showing that type of love, and I'm going to tell you why. There are 3 reasons in particular. The first reason is that Ruth is not a Jew. She is a Moabite. She is not from Israel. And typically, you would think that in the Jewish holy book, in the Old Testament, the heroes of their stories would be Jewish. But Ruth is not. She is from another land. She's a foreigner. The second reason why it's a little bit odd, perhaps a little bit interesting, is that Ruth is not only foreign, she is from Moab. Now, Moab to Israel is the enemy. They are not friends with one another. And there are even texts we can read back in the first 5 books of the Bible that bring down harsh penalties on Israelites who marry Moabites. And so she is not only not a friend and a foreigner, she is the enemy. So those are 2 reasons. And then the third reason, another interesting reason, is that this love is being shown from a daughter-in-law to a mother-in-law. Now, this is the kind of thing that makes wedding vows. You would think you would hear that from a husband to a wife or a wife to a husband. This isn't really the type of statement you would typically hear from a daughter-in-law to a mother-in-law. And not only a daughter-in-law to a mother-in-law, a former daughter-in-law to a former mother-in-law. But Ruth does that nonetheless. It's a very, very interesting story, and Ruth is probably the least likely person to be showing that type of love, but she does so anyway. She shows this unconditional, unadulterated, pure love to Naomi. Now, as I said before, this is probably not the type of love that Naomi has experienced recently, at least. One would hope that she experienced that type of love in her marriage to Elimelech, but we don't know. The text doesn't specify, but hopefully that was the case. But Elimelech had died long ago, and Naomi was clearly not happy. In fact, in the text, she says to the people when she returns to Israel, she says, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." Naomi is clearly not a happy camper. She is bitter, and she states that very poignantly. But despite that, Ruth shows this unconditional love to someone, and she does it very, very well. In fact, I would like to read you another story where I think this type of unconditional love is on display in a modern time. A number of years ago, in the Marriage Partnership Journal, Becky Zerby wrote a story about her husband, Roger. Now, Roger had early onset Alzheimer's disease, and he had just suffered a particularly difficult bout of forgetfulness. Well, she says that Roger left a journal on the pillow, and it said this, in Becky's words, "I picked up the journal on my pillow and read, 'Honey, today fear is taking over. The day is coming when all my memories of this life we share will be gone. In fact, you and the boys will be gone from me. I will lose you even as I am surrounded by you and your love. I don't want to leave you. I want to grow old in the warmth and the memories. Forgive me for leaving so slowly and painfully.' Blinking back tears, I picked up my pen and wrote, 'My sweet husband, what will happen when we get to the point where you no longer know me? I will continue to go on loving you and caring for you, not because you know me or remember our life, but because I remember you. I will remember the man who proposed to me and told me he loved me, the look on his face when his children were born, the father he was, the way he loved our extended family. I'll recall his love for writing, hiking, and reading, his tears at sentimental movies, the unexpected witty remarks, and how he held my hand while he prayed. I cherish the pleasure, obligation, commitment, and opportunity to care for you because I remember you.'" And that is true, unconditional, unadulterated, pure love. Shown from a wife to a husband who will no longer even know the wife that is loving him at some point. But that is the love that we are called to show one another. Now, once again, we have something interesting in this story, because while Becky and Roger are husband and wife, Naomi and Ruth are not. They are former daughter-in-law to former mother-in-law. So I want you to think about this today. I want you to think about showing love to somebody who does not expect it. In fact, let me tell you a story. When I was in college, I knew this guy who was an interesting character. He was a nice guy, but he struggled. He struggled with things like alcoholism and substance abuse, and it was tough. It was very difficult for him. In fact, I remember one night in particular, it was near finals time, and I was studying hard. It was one of those nights where you kind of pull an all-nighter and you just, work and work and work. Well, I was down in the laundry room in the dorm with another friend of mine, and we were both there just studying for our upcoming finals. And then this other guy came in, and he was clearly not in the best shape. He was very talkative and slurring his words and stumbling around. And I remember thinking, man, I am trying to study. Please just leave me alone so I can study and do well on my finals and have good grades. But he was there nonetheless, and he would not go away. I remember watching the clock as the minutes ticked into hours and the hours ticked away as well. Well, finally, it went from late to early, and he was still there, same old self, drinking something that I assumed was not something I would drink. And finally, I looked at him and I thought, man, this guy needs some help. He needs somebody to love him. And so I looked at him and I said, come on, let's go. And so we went back up to my dorm room. I got some toothpaste and a toothbrush, and I said, here, listen, just brush your teeth, drink some water. You need this. And so that's what he did. And again, it was early, probably 5 or 6. And I thought, man, he probably hasn't eaten in a while, and he needs some help. And so I thought, well, there is one place in this small college town open this early, so that's where we're going to go. This little cafe within walking distance. It was a cold morning, so we put our jackets on, and we began to walk. And we had a good conversation. I asked him about his life, and we talked, and we had a good time. And we got there. We both ordered food, we ordered something to drink, and we just sat there and had a conversation. And we had a good time. And I thought, man, he had been particularly annoying but a few hours ago because I was trying to accomplish a goal. And he just would not go away. But then I got to know him, and I thought, this is a person who is in deep pain and deep suffering. And so I took him to that breakfast, and we ate, and we drank, and we had a good time. And we began to walk back toward campus. I had a final coming up that day, and so I needed to get back, finish in that last-minute cramming if I could. And so we began to walk. And he began to open up in a way that I had not expected. He began to tell me things about his life that I hadn't heard, tell me about the difficulties and the pain. And finally, he turned to me and he said, you know, I've never had someone, a pastor, or someone from a religious background, take the time of day to ever talk to me. And he talked to me about how he was honored and how that meant so much to him. And I was truly humbled. And I thought, man, what if I just played him off as annoying and made him go away, or what if I just left? And I was grateful to God for leading me to show love to somebody who perhaps had not been shown love to for a long time. Well, we continue to keep in contact from time to time, and he's doing a little better, and I'm grateful for that. But none of that would have ever been possible without God leading me to show unconditional, unadulterated, pure love to somebody who needed it, somebody unexpected, somebody I did not think to do that for. But that is what happened nonetheless. So as you go today into your respective lives and so forth, I want to challenge you. You know, there are many people in our lives, and perhaps it is time for you to accept love from a place from which you do not expect it. Perhaps someone who doesn't like you very much, perhaps someone who you kind of, clash back and forth with. Maybe a boss or a coworker or an estranged family member, even an ex-husband or an ex-wife. Maybe a child with whom you have not spoken with for years. Maybe love is coming your way. And it might be unexpected, but I want you to accept it. Accept it anyway. Or maybe on the flip side. Maybe on the flip side we are, and it is our turn to show love to somebody else. Again, maybe it's somebody you don't like very much. A boss, a coworker, a former classmate, someone at school. Maybe a child of yours, maybe an ex-spouse, maybe somebody with whom you have not spoken for many, many years. Well, maybe it's time to show love to that person. Perhaps God is calling you to do that. Maybe he wants you to stand and show pure, unconditional, unadulterated love. Because that's what we all yearn for. It's what we all strive for in this life. It's what we all want. We just want somebody to show love to us. And so maybe it's going to come from an unexpected place. Maybe you are the unexpected person who is being called to show that to somebody else. So as you go on through your respective lives into this week or this month or this year, Think about that and consider that. And show love to somebody who you may not think deserves it. Or be ready to receive love from somebody who perhaps has hurt you in the past, who perhaps has done something that was not very nice, something that really put you in a bad place. Be ready to give love. Be ready to accept love. I would like to read you the quote I read once again at the very beginning of this sermon by C.S. Lewis. It says, "To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to be sure of keeping your heart intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully around with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safely in the casket of your selfishness. And in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will not change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, and irredeemable. The only place outside of heaven where you can be perfectly safe from the dangers of love is hell." Love is a funny thing. It changes us if it is true, honest, and pure. So once again, I'm going to call you. I'm going to call you to love somebody who isn't going to expect it from you. A parent, a child with whom you have not spoken, an ex-spouse, a coworker, a classmate. And if that is not you, because it may not be, perhaps you are a loving person after all, be ready to accept love from someone who you do not expect to get it from. Someone who you maybe haven't spoken to in a long time. Someone who has hurt you in the past. Someone who you don't think might be capable of love. Be ready, because love is coming. Whether you give it or whether you receive it, it's that time to love. Purely, unconditionally, unadulterated love, like Ruth showed to her former mother-in-law, Naomi. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Austin Roberts, and this is Creating Disciples. We hope to see you next time.